Hello and welcome. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Wendy, that's Dr. Wendy Bryant, who is a retired occupational therapist. That's the correct
Yep.
terminology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Along with lots of other things that we've just been discussing. You're definitely a mix. So although you're retired from doing the actual therapy as such,
hmm
you do a lot of other academia type of work and writing and
hmm
living and social and all those things, along with having, and although we are going to touch upon this isn't actually what the today's chat is about. Wendy also has vasculitis. I think I said that
That's
right.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is a chronic health condition, which can be incredibly difficult at times and come in very different forms of guise. Difficult, like a lot of these good ones that we talk about, very difficult to diagnose to start with. But what Wendy has just published a book called Rest Do Days, which is all around dealing with chronic fatigue. And as we know, chronic fatigue can come from many things, whether it be from MS, lupus, a stroke, long COVID, you name it, or it can just, I don't know if it necessarily has to come from anything. It just appears, doesn't it? Especially for
Yeah.
younger
Yeah.
people,
But yeah,
it
some
can come in
people.
it.
Yeah.
And what appealed to me, Wendy, about your title was the rest. Yes, first of all, we need to define what rest is, but the do bit, because people must get so frustrated. It's very hard, isn't it, to go from your normal life to this other life where the do is almost impossible to start with.
Yeah. And I'll say, I mean, for me, the book started from a position of I'm resting so much because of a fatigue that for me I associated with the vasculitis. The resting, I was bored with what I was doing. I didn't want to watch television. I was bored with, sitting around feeling ill. And I wanted to work out how to do things in a way that was manageable. So to me, the rest and the do go together. We're thinking about what you might do while you're resting, but also
Mm.
how you can rest in order to do things that are more demanding and more. I talk a lot in the book about demands and thinking about not necessarily emotional demands and those sort of things, but demands of activities. What does it take to stay upright, to sit in an upright position for any length of time if you're very fatigued, to keep your eyes open, to hold a book, or, to go out and see a friend. All these things have all sorts of physical and cognitive and social demands on us. And we can scale back the demands to rest, and we can scale up the demands to do things, and balance the two, switching between the two. So the book very much comes from my identity as an occupational therapist, and as you say, one that's practiced. I practiced for many years in the NHS and social care, but also I've taught occupational therapy for an equal amount of time. It was split between the two and my research, which is particularly focused on mental health. So I would also say, for me, fatigue it can be very much associated with issues like depression. People find, they literally cannot get the energy together to do the things they need to do.
And it's very hard because, working as we do around, looking at chronic health, mental health, and particularly not just anxiety, I don't mean just anxiety, but depression play a huge role. And it's understanding how the two, whatever condition you may have, and the mental health, how they're intertwined, to understand sometimes to be able to separate them, to be able to move forward as well in management.
Yeah, I mean, as occupational therapists, we don't separate mental and physical health. So from the very early origins, of occupational therapy, it didn't matter what was wrong with a person. We would bring them together and we would work with all the issues at the same time. And occupational therapists will have been trained to work in, mental health services and in physical general hospitals and so on, and in social services. So we don't have that kind of splitting off of
Yes,
mental
and I
and
think I
physical health.
explained what I was trying to say. I think I didn't explain it quite correctly, because
Okay, yeah,
obviously
go for it.
you do, when you're treating somebody, if that's the right word, it's looking at them as a whole,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And obviously, if someone's depressed or they've got a psychosis, that is going to be a very prominent issue, or Alzheimer's, for instance. But if somebody's got, somebody's had a stroke, you're working in the setting you're working in, but you're not forgetting those other things. And the same for me, fatigue made me very fed up. It made me very anxious about going out and doing things. It made me anxious about, can I manage a shower today? But it also, made me feel physically in a lot of pain, tired, sick, sweaty, all sorts of physical symptoms as well. And socially, I think in the book I link fatigue with sickness behaviour. And the idea that you want to withdraw, that can't cope with people and with conversations. And I always know now when my fatigue's getting the upper hand, because I can feel that, actually I need to get out of this now. I need to find a quiet spot. Often if I am out with people, I'll go to the loo, because you can sit in a toilet cubicle for a bit and be on your own, just to kind of reduce the demands on myself before I go back. So yeah.
Going back to your own journey and how you ended up writing the book, was this
Mm.
based on, or I presume it's probably a mixture of factors that made you end up writing it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I had time because I was forced to retire because of my vasculitis. It was very difficult to control. I had two relapses, both which did damage to my eyes, my lungs, my peripheral nerves. So I couldn't work. And so I had time to do writing. I also had evolved a strategy which I called rest do days, because when I was looking at advice on fatigue, I got quite frustrated with it, because it didn't really align with the way I was thinking about activities and occupations and trying to balance them. There's a lot of talk about pacing, but it's often based on how long you do something for, not the actual nature of the activities. So felt like I could write something like about that. I could use that knowledge. And also I'd edited 2 textbooks on occupational therapy and mental health. So I was used to writing, and I enjoyed writing, and also writing something I could do without, in quite to me, it's not a particularly demanding thing to do. I enjoy it, and I, feel I'm reasonably good at it. So when I'd finished the textbook, I took a few months off the last textbook and thought, actually, now I'm ready to write a book, and I really don't want to write a textbook. I don't want to do that ever again. Thank you very much. But I'd really like to write about rest do days. So that's really how it came about. Also, my vasculitis, so we settled into a sort of pattern of where I didn't relapse again. I have regular flares of my vasculitis, so I'm often in touch with the hospital, say help, but it stopped being such a kind of difficult thing to manage. It became much more I don't know, I got to know the team supporting me. I got better at kind of managing the kind of, is this a flare, is it a relapse, or is it just a grumble kind of feeling? And I think that comes with any chronic illness. You get to know, how it works for you, and then something new happens, you think, oh God, now what's going on? And you think, well, I'll just wait a bit to see how this is going to turn out. It doesn't feel like a big emergency right now. So yeah.
Which is very frightening, especially at the beginning when you're not
Oh,
sure, and takes up vast amounts of energy to cope with what is happening, isn't it?
yeah, and in the book I write about supports, and I think to me is understanding and being clear about what support you have for resting and doing. I mean, the last big flare I had was in May this year. It was my eyes, and now I know the drill for what happens when my eyes. My eyes flare up. I have to ring the eye clinic. I have to talk to them, explain particular symptoms, and then we organise a you know, an appointment and I have, you know, that day appointment because the risk is that I lose my sight. And I've got friends I call. Now, all that I put into place over, you know, the last 7, 8 years, because before that it was exhausting. It was all I could
Mm,
do was to get to eye clinic and sit there and wait to be seen. Whereas these days, you know, because I've got those supports in place, and I know the eye clinic really well, so I know my resting places at the eye clinic. Whereas in
mm.
the early days, you know, the idea of resting in the eye clinic was just, you know, I couldn't imagine it. It was like, you know, I've got to wait on the edge of my chair for when I'm called, sort of thing. Whereas now I know how long they take and what happens in what order. And it is about being familiar with those things. Yeah, so I can rest due at the hospital as much as I can at home, which I think is difficult to understand when you're first, you know, faced with fatigue.
Well,
And
I think it's difficult, but it's much easier when you've got a book like yours on
oh,
hand to
thank you.
explain it. And I think that's what I said to you earlier before we started recording, was that what I liked about your book, it wasn't one of those pick it up and here you go, this is what you do, this is what you eat. And you know, you're possibly going to get better, but we all know that's not the case. And
Mm,
but what we do know about chronic conditions is management, and yours is very much managing, but managing rather than being told how to manage it. I really like the first half of your book is actually explain to people how to understand your own body, your own symptoms.
mm,
And I feel like you hold my hand as I walk through how do I examine and ask myself these questions so that I can get to a state where, like you said, where when your eyes flare up, I'm there. I know what to do. But you need someone to help you do that. And
mm.
I think that's what you do brilliantly. I mean, if you'd like to explain that, the first half is excellent about how you do it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, the book is structured so the very first chapter after the introduction is getting started, just as sort of this is how you could do a rest do day. And it's very practical and sort of thinking about how long to spend resting and how long to spend doing. But also I add in a bit about balance so we understand, you know, basic concepts of balance. And then the second chapter is about being supported, because to me it's very difficult to have a rest do day if you're worrying about where you live or, you know, who you're living with or particular capacities you might have. So for instance, when I had COVID, I didn't have a rest do day because I was dealing with a very acute illness. I had sick days where I just had to look for, you know, whatever I could manage to do. So there is some sort of active part of a rest do day where you're making active decisions. And then the next chapter is about being informed about fatigue and understanding what fatigue is or could be, but also how to describe it to other people so you can get that support you need. And then the next chapter is about being organized. And in that one, we look at habits, and particularly, you know, habits are good things to have. We often talk about bad habits, but they get us through the day and they save energy. So to me, you know, attending to my habits and nudging them into different forms was really helpful for resty days. You know, having different places to rest, as I've already said, having interesting things to do while I rest, but also having the habit of pausing while I'm doing things and thinking about, oh, what am I resting? You know, what am I resting here? And what am I taking a rest from? And it's very, very focused on activities and things you're doing rather than on what you think you should be doing or what you other people, like you say in books, have told you to do. Think about, well, what I'm actually doing in my life right here now. Let's forget what other people might think about what I should be doing. And that I think that sort of paves the way really for a better understanding. Here I am, this is my fatigue, these are my habits, and these are the supports I have, as you say, in that first half. And that's a common approach in fatigue management, is to build up awareness of how your fatigue affects you, but also in doing that you are looking at, well, you know, what have I got here, what am I having to deal with? And then the rest of the book, the other two big chapters, one is about being realistic, because it's all very well, you know, tending to your habits. There are times when your habits just go out the window, or, you know, you just have to go with the flow. And for me, that's where the senses come in really, really helpful, if you like, for dealing with fatigue, because fatigue is a sensory experience. For me, it's not really primarily an emotional experience. It is about feeling overwhelmed by too much light, too much noise, too much strong tasting food. Any of these things, sensations, can be difficult to manage when you're fatigued. So have a look at, well, how can you sort of put yourself in positions where you're, having to absorb less sensory information, or if you want to more, how do you seek out more? And then looking at other sort of things like stress management and assertiveness in a very brief way, because I think if you need to know more about those things, there are plenty of other places to learn them.
What I like is that you've got a very, you're obviously very good at writing. That almost sounds brilliant,
Thank you.
But you mentioned that you enjoy writing, and because you're very good at it, you offer a light touch, so one can understand exactly what you're saying without hammering home the point.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm pleased. I'm really pleased to hear that, because the final chapter, being inspired one, I had all sorts of ideas about how to write it, and then it kind of wrote itself. And because the joy of being inspired is energy comes with being inspired, and I think part of my rescue days was they were an inspiration. It's really exciting to realize I had an approach that worked, and what was inspiring me and what helped. And sometimes it is literally just taking a deep breath, and that understanding of inspiring. And I really enjoyed sort of exploring those different meanings of words without, as you say, really having to spell it out, or just or just try this out. Is this going to work? Or maybe this, or let's not get too deep and heavy about stuff. Because also, and the publishers were fantastic in this. Georgina from Hammersmith Publishers with books. I should get the name right. She was great in discussing with me the nature of a book that's written for people with fatigue. You don't want it to be heavy duty hard work. It needs to be broken up with different ideas and different ways of approaching things, and that's why I ended up illustrating it to these small illustrations to kind of break up the page and make it more digestible, if you
Well,
like.
yes, because it's also the attention span. It's very hard,
Yeah.
especially if you have neurological issues, and that can be incredibly hard to keep. But you do need, if you can just go off and look at well, for someone like me who's got the attention of a gnat, whatever you call it, I like having a little bit of an illustration and then I can refocus straight again.
And find your place in the book again, which of course what I've been doing all the time in with the script, is checking, well, where was it? Oh, I know it was near that picture of that. And I think also for me, this is a book that you don't have to read from beginning to end. It's one you can dwell on some bits and not on others. So sometimes for me at the moment, I feel like I need a good dose of getting started again, because there's been so much going on recently, over recent weeks. But at another time I'd be really looking at being organized, and how can I sort of nudge some of these habits that I've got into that aren't quite working really well. So I think for me it's a book that I hope people won't just look at once but come back to again and again.
Yes, I think possibly it's not about putting you on the straight and narrow, but it's once again guiding you through management. But I think, as you said, you can't have all these lists, because you don't know, as you say, from day to day what your day is going to be.
You know what my life might be like in a month, or well, in some ways I do have some of that experience because of the way the treatment for my vasculitis works. So I'm on a 5-monthly cycle of rituximab, which is a monoclonal antibody treatment for vasculitis, and I'm very lucky to have that treatment. It works really, really well for me, but it takes ages to work, so at least 6 weeks after the infusion before I start to feel an improvement. And about 6 weeks before the next one, I start to, as I say to my friends and family, I'm beginning my graceful decline now, and I will have much less energy. So at the moment, right now, I'm in my peak of my cycle, and to add to my what's been quite a good autumn in some ways. I've had an iron infusion as well, and I hadn't realised how much anemia was a problem for me. Having lots and lots of issues. Having had this iron infusion, I feel brilliant at the moment, and long may it last. But I do know it's not going to last. And I do know if I pick up flu or COVID again or a cold, I will be, in trouble. So there are things I can predict, but I don't know that they're going to happen today or tomorrow. And I think that is often true for a lot of us in a lot of aspects of our lives. We may get caught up in traffic, we may get an unexpected phone call. Somebody we work with or live with might be particularly grumpy today. We don't live in this kind of predictable world. It is very, very uncertain, and therefore it's important to not think, oh, I'll do that, I'll have my rest day later in the week. I think, right, how can I rest now? I need a break. How can I take a rest? And what sort of rest do I need? I think the other sort of mistake about rest often made is about doing nothing. It's about, just stopping. And it's actually really difficult to do nothing at all. As soon as you, sort of few deep breaths and look at the sky and your head's filling with thoughts about, what you need to buy at the supermarket later, or
Yes.
what somebody said to you yesterday. So I think, paying attention to what we do is a great, it's very exciting and feels simple, but it's also really complicated.
Well, actually, it's very, your approach is actually very mindful
Hmm.
in many ways, isn't it?
It is, but I struggle with mindfulness because there's too much emphasis on what's going on in your head. And I think, to me, the nature of occupational therapy is that we're focusing on what people are doing. So even when I was
Yes.
working in mental health, working with people who are very, very unwell and very, very consumed with what was going on in their head, we're still doing things. We're not sitting talking about what they're thinking about, or trying to change the thoughts, or how they think or so on. We would do some of that, but we would put it with activity, like go shopping with people, do crosswords with people, because to me the activity becomes like the focus. And if you can focus on an activity rather than on these difficult thoughts and feelings or pain, if you've got pain issues, then it actually helps to be in a different space and be a different
It
person.
gives you that respite, doesn't it? And
Yeah,
in
yeah, but
many ways,
also a different experience of yourself. So if you think about, things like music therapy and drama therapy and so on, they will use particular arts, media to work with people. And it's same with occupational therapy. You're looking at doing things, not just to escape those thoughts, but also to realize that I can have those thoughts, but I can also do this other thing.
and
I'm
yeah, and I
mm,
was kind of sort of thinking mindful I was actually thinking if you're walking, being mindful of your surroundings rather than thinking about
yeah.
what's in your head, mindful of you're enduring an experience or you're looking at the colours. That was
Yeah. And
that's
I
what I
think
can think.
I think that's the thing. I think that's a good way of describing mindfulness. And for me, I would take it further and say I'm thinking about the feeling of the ground under my feet, or
Yes.
the but also I'm also mindful of who is coming into the place where I'm walking, and who's there, and who I would have liked to have been with me. And or maybe what, there's all sorts of things you can have going through your mind. But for me, it's useful to come back to what am I doing, what is it I'm doing right now, and
Mm.
how can I make that more manageable, and if you like, more nurturing for myself, rather than being something that feels draining. Now, of course, that gets difficult when you're dealing with the laundry or stuff like that. But
Yes.
and that I think is interesting. I think, well, okay, I'll put stuff in a washing machine now, and then I'll do something that's a bit more interesting and stimulating for myself.
Now I've written down 3 points, and I'm just
Hmm.
trying to remember why I've written them down.
Try me,
They're always
try
obvious.
me.
They were always obvious. There was a part you mentioned about despair, there was acceptance, and there was disclosure. So
Okay.
the
Yeah.
the disclosure one I thought was really interesting. It's something that I hadn't really thought about. What
Mm.
you I think you were saying was that when people ask you about your condition. They kind of want to know all the nit grit, and you're expending a lot of energy explaining it to them. And then they just go, all right, fine, thanks. Oh, sorry, really sorry for you. And they bugger off and that's it. And
Or they say, oh, I knew someone who had that once.
yeah, that's the kind of thing. I probably am guilty of all these bad things as well. But it's really interesting, as what you're saying is, making that, that's another thing of you helping in this book is make that decision as to how much you actually want to tell somebody.
Yeah. Because when I was first really unwell with vasculitis, one of the first treatments that many people with sort of vasculitis I've got have. I'm not saying everybody has it, and also vasculitis is a really rare disease. So I'm thinking if people are panicking, think, oh, I must have vasculitis. You probably haven't got it. If you got fatigue, it probably is not due to vasculitis. But one of the first treatments is chemotherapy. So and a cytotoxic drug, which is awful. And you just say to people the word chemotherapy, and for me, they were all rushing around, wanting to help, and of course wanting to know, was it cancer and all this sort of stuff. And I had to make a decision very quickly, very early on, about who I told what to, because on how I told people, because it was overwhelming. I was, really upset about what was happening to me. These days, it's easier because people are used to I haven't died yet, and people are used to, me sort of having my ups and downs and going to the hospital. But yeah, you choose what you disclose, and especially in asking for help. I think for me, I'm going to ask people to help me with very specific things, and I'm going to think about who I'm going to ask. And I'm going to tell them why I need help with that, but I'm not going to tell them the whole, they don't need to know my life story if I'm asking them to help me put the bins out. It's not, that's not what they need. It's not, I don't need to waste energy on doing that. So yeah, definitely disclosure is and I suppose knowing that comes from my experience working as an occupational therapist in mental health, and thinking about how people manage disclosure about trauma and so on. You definitely don't need to tell everybody the whole story in order to get their support and help. And as you say, if they're going to be this sort of people that just want the story and then they're going to disappear, then you definitely don't want to be wasting energy on people like that.
Okay, next word.
Yeah.
Despair.
Despair. So yeah, and in the book I'm careful to, people are despairing because when you look at yourself and your situation, it can be hard. And there's no, in Rest Do Days terms, there's no need to, let's not go down the route of feeling overwhelmed and upset and so on. So stop reading a book, find somewhere to some place to be and people to be with that means it's easier to be alive, if you like, and then come back. I'm not there to do that, but I would say that in terms of despair, I think again, if when I found ways of resting that feel productive for me, and it might be messaging a friend while I'm resting, or doing some crochet or going for a walk, those things have helped me with my despair when I've been feeling overwhelmed by it. And at other times, I think about times when I've decided I need to get out the house, and that's hard when fatigue is hard and difficult to manage. But I think, well, actually, if the only thing I do is manage to drive my car to somewhere by a park and walk through a different park and take myself to a cafe, actually that's brilliant. That's going to be a great thing to do, and I will feel different when I get home. But yeah, despair is the time to look for support, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, and I think it's great that you mentioned about support, and too many people are too proud quite often, and you just think, no, and if you've got true friends, friends really do want to help. They want to feel that they can make a difference, don't they?
Yeah, and in the support chapter, I talk about the sort of strength of our connections with people, and some connections can become stronger if you test them out. You can ask people, maybe someone you wouldn't necessarily think of as being a person you would seek out, but they may actually be able to help, and they might not help you in the way that you want them to. you know, but they actually what they do is helpful. And you know, sometimes it comes, I think of some people who have supported me that, you know, I have to put up with some of their stuff that they want to you know, make sure I know about, you know, and that's fine, because in the end, you know, none of us are perfect, and they're putting up with me being, you know, a bit switched off and not listening properly, and not that sort of thing if I'm fatigued. So I think it is about accepting, as you probably your third point, is accepting that, you know, when we're human beings, we're not machines, we're living organisms. We have all sorts of rough edges and things that don't quite work very well, and that's okay. You know, our task is to survive and thrive,
Mm.
and you know, be social beings and occupational beings who can relate to each other and do things together.
But I think you've managed to bring a really great blend of being a very good writer, as we've
Thank you.
established, along with your professional occupational therapist hat on,
Mm,
you know, very practical and really understanding people's needs through to your own understanding of what it's like to be in this position. And
mm.
it's a great blend. So thank you so much for your time. And I really wish you well with the
Thank
book,
you.
in your health, um,
Thank you.
and all those
Yeah.
good things. So thank you very much, Wendy.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me as well. It's been
It's a
great. Thank
pleasure.
you.